Before the days of the MCU, and even before X-Men and Spider-Man, Marvel hit it big with Blade in 1998. This movie was a lot of people's introduction to the Vampire Slayer. It's fascinating that Marvel's first successful big screen endeavor wasn't one of its colorful spandex-wearing heroes, but a character that, for its time, was more obscure when standing next to the likes of the Wallcrawler or the Big Green Goliath. Wesley Snipes embodied the character in such a way that made his version the quintessential daywalker. If you want a deep dive into these movies, I recommend the 3-part series by High Top Films, Captain Midnight, and Godzilla Mendoza. They do an excellent job covering the Blade film trilogy. But what about his video games? I bet you didn't know that the half-human, half-vampire, all badass has a couple of titles worth talking about. Grab your garlic and sharpen your steaks. This is the Blade video games retrospective. Blade made his video game debut with a tie-in to the 1998 movie of the same name, developed by Hammerhead and published by Activision. This gem was released on November 20th, 2000. It follows a gothic adventure of Blade and his mentor Whistler as they uncover a mystery amongst the vampire clans, with an M rating for blood, gore, and violence. This detail may be unremarkable at face value, but I point it out because I think this may be Marvel's first M-rated video game, and one of the first M-rated superhero games in general. The only other one I can think of is Spawn the Eternal, which was released a few years back, also on the PlayStation, which is just about the one thing it has going for it. You've earned it, kiddo. But the less said about that game, the better. It is a dark and stormy night in Gothic City. Our hero hitches a ride underneath a helicopter as he goes on one of his nightly hunts. Blade and Whistler receive the tip that the vampire clan, Van Espers, are up to no good at a shipping dock. It's up to Blade to investigate. If the bumping techno music led you to believe that this is an adaptation of the movie, you're not alone. I was expecting to slay some vampire ass in the middle of a blood rave. But this game is actually not an adaptation of the movie. It's a unique story taking place before the events of the film. Let's see what it's all about. Upon taking control of Blade, my first impression is that he feels really heavy, which isn't the most encouraging thing, since tank controls can be one of the key ingredients for a perfect disaster. Surprisingly, they're not a problem here. Still, a strange decision since Blade is supposed to be a super fast, agile vampire. While we're talking about being agile, Blade also has the ability to spring up to jump over bottomless pits and reach high platforms. His jump is a little janky, and once he leaps off, you don't have any control of his trajectory. Thankfully, platforming is not a prominent aspect in this game, apart from a few instances where you have to jump over trapdoors. So Blade controls just fine. However, there's one issue that makes maneuvering through levels a little frustrating at times. There's this glitchy collision problem between Blade and the environment that will often stop you in your tracks. It was a consistent problem throughout the majority of the game, where I'm simply trying to walk down a hallway or turn a corner, and I'm being stopped by the forces of spectral architecture. It doesn't make the game unplayable, but it was annoying having to constantly step back and adjust Blade just so I can walk out of a room. And by association, it made the tank controls more of a problem than they should be, because you have to slowly turn Blade every time this happens, which, like I said, was consistent throughout the whole game. Despite that issue, levels are well designed. They offer a surprising amount of exploration. Go off the beaten path and you'll find a secret stash of supplies, or a collectible. There's even multiple paths that take you to entirely different levels, offering some replayability. On my first playthrough, when I reached the second level, I had a choice of 2 doors to take. One took me to some sort of recreation area within a warehouse, and the other takes you to a big ship, each having their own set of puzzles. But it doesn't stop there. You'll also have to backtrack after finding key items or flipping a switch a la Resident Evil. Playing this game for the first time, I was quick to draw comparisons to the RE franchise. We've got the series staple, tank controls, and fixed camera angles, although the instances where the camera switches to a fixed perspective are used sparingly in Blade. And while the levels here are open and offer plenty of exploration, they're a little more self-contained than they are in Resident Evil. It's not one big sprawling level like the Spencer Mansion. There are also some elements of item management and survival horror, without the horror. Yes, you do face off against vampires, zombies, and werewolves, oh my, but come on. It's not exactly survival horror when you're playing as this badass motherfucker. Let's talk about how Blade gets his hands dirty. You've got an extensive arsenal to choose from. A pistol, shotgun, the iconic machine pistol from the movie, and the blade launcher. All these weapons feel fairly different from one another, having different fire rates and dealing varying amounts of damage. An interesting layer to this game's combat mechanics is that you have different types of ammunition. Standard ammo, best used against normal humans, carbon ammo for those wearing body armor, explosive ammo, self-explanatory, and silver ammo for those pesky suckheads. This layer of combat goes pretty far in adding a bit of strategy to combat. If you use the wrong type of ammo on an enemy, it will take a lot more of that ammo to bring them down. And if you don't properly manage your ammo, you can find yourself in a hairy situation. Switching between ammo types is really intuitive. You'd imagine that you have to pull up this clunky menu that brings the game to a grinding halt, ruining the pace of combat, but that's not the case at all. All you do is hold down one of the shoulder buttons and the action pauses as you easily scroll through your ammo types here on the bottom left corner. Once you pick the appropriate ammo type, you release the shoulder button, and just like that you're right back in the action. It's quick, smooth, and easy. The same goes for switching weapons and using consumables. This game came out before the time where third-person shooters were figured out. Before Resident Evil 4 graced us with its over-the-shoulder free aiming. So like most third-person shooters of the time, Blade uses a lock-on system. And it works just fine. It's got a fair range, and switching between targets is easy. How this game takes this simple system and elevates it is with the inclusion of the target gauge. I don't know, I might just be a simple man, but this mechanic really impressed me. When you lock onto an enemy, you will notice that this circle on the top right corner of the screen will start to fill up. If you time your shot right and shoot just as this gauge fills up, you will land a headshot. I think this is a brilliant way to work around the limitations that comes with not having the ability to manually aim your guns in this game. This especially works wonders against the slow-moving zombies that would otherwise eat up a bunch of your bullets if you're careless and pump shots into their bodies. But there were other times where I would weigh my options. When I would be facing off against multiple enemies that are firing back. Do I try to take them out as fast as I can by riddling them with bullets? Or do I try to conserve my ammo by taking the time to land a headshot, but leaving myself vulnerable? It makes combat just a little more interesting. Some weapons fill the target gauge at different speeds, going even further in making weapons feel different from one another. Apart from shooting bloodsuckers with your guns, you also have some melee attacks. You can punch enemies with your fisticuffs, or use the weapon you're goddamn named after. Something I found strange is that your sword doesn't do much damage against human enemies. I get that Blade sword could be infused with silver or have, I don't know, garlic powder sprinkled on it, making it especially effective against vampires. But even as a person, you're still being cut up by a whole ass sword. Melee combat works fairly simple. There's not much strategy involved past mashing the attack button and hoping your enemy hits the ground before you do. More often than not, you'll come out on top, as long as you land the first hit. There aren't any combos or light and heavy attacks. There is a stamina meter that depletes whenever you use melee attacks, but managing it never became a challenge. I think adding a block button would have been a great way to make melee combat more interesting, especially when you face off against vampire ninjas. I'll say it again, vampire ninjas. Having to block these guys' attacks and looking for the right opening while managing your stamina meter would have been more fun. Blade could have used more defense options in general. You have the ability to strafe, but it's so slow that it's practically useless. A roll would have been more useful for dodging incoming fire, or the ability to press up against a wall and pop out for some pot shots. Otherwise, all you do is stand there, take the hits, and hope you have a health pack to fill up after a gunfight. There were a lot of instances where enemies would jump out of hiding spots and attack you from behind. These were the reasons for most of my deaths in this game. A quick turn like they have in Resident Evil would have been useful during these instances. Probably my biggest issue I had with this game is how inconsistent the placement of save points are. Checkpoints are completely absent in Blade. Instead, you'll come across these symbols where you can manually save your game. Sometimes they show up just a couple minutes apart, being a little generous. Other times you'll start up a new level and you won't come across a save point long enough that if you die, you'll start in the previous level. This can make the game tedious at times. I don't understand why they didn't just let you save at the end of every level. There are also these other spots that look very similar to a save point, but they're actually resupply points. Apart from picking up items in the world, you can also spend your hard-earned cash that you picked out of the cold dead bodies of your enemies on these resupply points. You don't get to handpick what ammo or consumables you want to purchase, but instead you're given a random assortment of supplies. This isn't really a problem. I always found whatever items I was given to be useful. It feels a little unfair to judge a 20-year-old PlayStation game graphically, but I actually think this game's visuals hold up fairly well. I grew up on this era of video games, so I have a soft spot for polygonal graphics. You'll notice that this game can be a little dark at times, which did strain my eyes a bit, but I'm pretty sure this was intentional. It adds to the moody, gritty tone that should be felt in a Blade story. Unfortunately, Wesley Snipes doesn't reprise his role as Blade for the video game, but Red Pepper, yep, that is his name, he does a good job of sounding like a badass vampire hunter.
In the day it rested again, and the wise one said that should it rise that night, there would be no day tomorrow, only darkness, cold and unending. Party time.
On the other hand, some characters sound like they're straight out of Looney Tunes.
You trippin'? You was told no looking. Shit, we all were. You know who we're working for, man. The Palatine do not screw around.
Let's get into the rest of the story. So following his contact's tip, Blade comes across a shipment withholding some sort of evil power. The Palatine clan are shipping something dark into the country. Blade gets caught in the middle of a vampire civil war when they hold Whistler hostage, which forces Blade into working for the Palatine leader, Mannheim. Mannheim orders Blade to go after the rivaling vampire clan, the Dragonetti. Blade then makes his way through a torn down Chinatown and reaches a Buddhist temple, where he confronts the Dragonetti leader. He learns from him that the Palatine are looking to raise an ancient evil that is far too powerful to control. All that they know would be turned into ruin.
It has no name. It is ancient and powerful. Even now, when it turns in its half-sleep, they cannot control it. Soon it will awaken, and this, all this, will be laid waste.
Blade decides to prevent this as we go through an assortment of environments. A classic sewer level, a museum. There are a couple of boss fights along the way. Most of them are straightforward with the exception of one where you go against some sort of mystical being. You have to use the enemy's projectile attacks by lining yourself up just right so it hits the boss. I think this fight was executed fairly well. After this encounter, Blade gets knocked out, and you take control of Whistler for a short level, where you're tasked with finding serum for Blade within a lab. Strangely enough, I think Whistler controls a little better than Blade. The ability to jump is taken away, being replaced with a headbutt, and you're limited to a shotgun. But Whistler's backwalk and strafe is a lot faster than Blade's. This may seem minuscule, but it goes so far in compensating for the sluggish tank controls. Once Blade is back into play, you make your way to a warehouse where you confront Mannheim. He reveals to Blade what he plans to do with the power he wields.
I'm sure the Dragonetti told you we can't control the Night Beast. Well, we seem to have had a little difficulty so far, don't you think? Imagine, Blade, a world of eternal night. No more skulking in the shadows. No need to hide anymore. It will be our world, and ours alone.
Motherfucker, are you out of your damn mind?
I gotta say it, right?
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
There's actually two ways to fight the Night Beast. Throughout the game, you come across these parts that are meant for the secret weapon that Whistler is putting together. If you manage to collect all these parts, Whistler will show up during the final boss fight and toss you a laser gun to kill the Night Beast with. My slacker ass couldn't find all the parts, so I had to do it the alternative way, which is to run around and push these buttons in a specific sequence. Once you hit all the buttons, this big gate opens up, exposing the Night Beast to sunlight. Kind of anticlimactic, but I actually prefer the cutscene that plays after killing the Night Beast this way. Blade gets the cooler line.
You ain't Jack.
Before the credits roll, we get a short scene of Blade continuing his nightly hunts.
Daywalker.
My name is Blade.
Blade on the PlayStation turned out to be a pleasant surprise, perhaps overlooked when standing next to a certain legendary game amongst comic book fans that was released that same year. There's plenty of good stuff in here. If you're a fan of comic book games, you owe it to yourself to play this forgotten gem. Before we close out, we have a Game Boy Color port to talk about. Do the thing. Man, it's been a minute since I've done one of these. Blade also got a Game Boy Color port released around the same time as its console counterpart, developed by HAL Laboratory, and it is a charming little beat-em-up slash shooter slash fighting game. Yeah, so there are 3 different styles of levels in this game. The primary one being classic 2D side-scrolling beat-em-up levels, in the vein of Double Dragon. You walk from left to right and come across varying enemies, each with their own kinks. For as simple as it is, there's quite a handful of moves you can pull off. You also have the ability to block, and if you time your block just right, your opponent will be stunned and you can perform a special attack. Pulling off these counterattacks is fun and satisfying. Pressing A and B at the same time allows you to use Blade's double-bladed boomerang thing just like in the movie. You have a limited supply of them. As you progress through levels, you'll occasionally be able to enter doors in the background, revealing small encounters against enemies that may drop a secret item upon defeat. Although it is hard to call these secrets when there's a big red arrow letting you know which doors you can enter. At the end of most levels, you'll encounter a boss which introduces the fighter style levels. Here you get to use Blade's iconic sword. These are my least favorite of the 3 gameplay types, simply because most boss fights were so frustrating. I must have died at least 10 times on the first one. I was having such a bad time on this fight that it almost made me quit the game. Eventually, I got lucky and the boss decided to be a pushover. I guess he started feeling sorry for me. This could just be that I suck, but I didn't have any trouble at all with the other bosses. On the contrary, the rest were too easy. I even wiped the floor with the final boss. I don't know, could be a design mishap, or maybe I just got unlucky on the first boss fight. The last kind of level are the shooter sections. Oddly enough, the game starts with one of these levels. You're stationary right in the middle of the screen. The goal is to survive for a set amount of time as you shoot enemies in the background. Controlling the reticule is surprisingly smooth. Enemies will toss crap at you like grenades or just random junk. You can shoot these out of the air to avoid taking damage. They will also try to flank you from your left and right side. Thankfully, you can also shoot in those directions. I enjoyed these sections quite a bit. The later levels can get intense, testing your reflexes and marksmanship. I think it would have been cool to have a boss fight set in one of these levels, to have a bit of variety between them. Because apart from the final boss, the rest are just color swaps of ninjas or vampire demons. The levels are laid out on this map of Gothic City, and you can play them in whatever order you please, but it's best to do them in the order in which they are numbered. Skip ahead and you might get your ass handed to you. At the end of every level, you acquire points that you can spend on upgrades. I wasn't expecting this game to go this far in terms of content. I was impressed. The story is forgettable. Right now I'm having trouble recounting it. Blade is after a new clan of vampires. They're looking to resurrect an ancient vampire lord guy. You know, the same old song and dance. I do like Blade's dialogue. It's that kind of cocky, take no shit attitude that makes him so cool. This is another Blade title that I would gladly recommend. It's a simple little game that can be beaten in around 2 hours. Maybe sooner if you don't get stuck on the first boss fight like I did. But besides that, there's plenty to enjoy here. That's 2 good games right out of the gate for the Daywalker. Maybe the concepts introduced in the first console game can be expanded and improved upon in a sequel. Wait a minute. I think I see something in the mist. Is that... Oh boy.